Hey friends, Pastor Zach here. We're continuing on through the Ten Commandments, and today we're at commandment number six, which has to do with respect for people. Yesterday we talked, or last week we talked about respect for authority through honoring our father and mother. The sixth commandment is thou shalt not kill. It's respect for life and honoring life. Um, and so what's interesting about these next commandments, specifically commandments 6 through 8, through the commentary I was going through, is that they set the minimum standard for Israel to be a just society. And they give the context in which people are called to be holy through loving the God with all their heart, mind, and soul, and their neighbor as their self. It's really what these commandments are all emphasizing. And so here's what's interesting about them. I love that idea of that commandments 6 through 8 set the minimum standard for Israel to be a just society. Having been a teacher and having been a student for so long, um, you know, you sometimes ask the question, what is the minimum I need to do in order to pass this assignment or pass this class, right? It's something that's asked all the time, right? You want to know what's the bare minimum I got to do to have to pass. I had a friend who had went through a lot of things, and I remember we were in the library together working on our papers, and he was, you know, had to do a 12-page paper or whatever for class, and he ends up asking the professor. He emails him saying, "Hey, what's the bare minimum I need to pass this class? It's a C. What do I have now?" And he says, "If I don't turn in this paper, what will I get?" The professor says you will receive a passing grade of a C even if you don't turn in this paper. And he says, then I'm not turning it in. Thank you. Bye. I'll take the F, get by, not put in the work. Yeah, that's the question that we ask. What is the bare minimum we do to have pass? This is what Jesus is saying. These commandments 6 through 8 are the bare minimum commandments. He's not even setting the standard for what he wants us to do. He's setting the bare minimum standard of what we're required to do in order to be his people. So the commandment to not murder is a bare minimum commandment. That's what we barely need to do to be a Christian, right? That's what we barely need to do to pass. But God has a whole other standard he wants us to be attaining to that scripture takes us through. So Exodus 20 is the giving of the commandments. Leviticus 19 is the civil application of the commandments. And Matthew chapter 5 is the heart experience of each of these commandments. So in each of these instances, we'll see how God is taking us from the bare minimum to the standard that he wants for us. So Exodus 20 verse 13 says, do not murder. Leviticus 19 verses 16 through 17 says, do not stand up and take the life of your neighbor, but neither shall you hate your brother in your hearts. In Matthew 5, verses 21 through, in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 5, he says, you not only shall you not murder, for whoever murders is liable to judgment, but I say don't even get angry with your brother. Whoever is angry or hates his brother is liable for the judgment. So we get this progression from um, you know, the bare minimum to the civil to the social and the moral. And further on in Leviticus 19, God gives this crazy example of, when it comes to a court hearing or a court situation, do no injustice in court. Pay your dues and move on. Solve this problem quickly. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, if you have an enemy, come to terms with your accuser who's taking you to court very quickly, lest the judge hand you over and the judge hand you over to the guard and you be put to prison and they take every last penny from you. What's his point? Fix it quickly. Stop it before it gets worse. How do we prevent murder from happening? Nip it in the bud quickly. Stop it before it turns into anger and it turns into hate and it evolves into something worse. Jesus says act quickly on this sort of thing. So what's Jesus's whole point of, not murder and loving our enemies? How do we make it happen? What's the in between? Well, the in between is what we call reconciliation, restoring the relationship before things get worse. You know, I played on the PUC, soccer team for a long time, or for a couple of years, my freshman and sophomore year. And I remember one year I didn't want to disappoint my coach. I had this shrewd and harsh coach. We had to be up at 5 a.m. for practice every day. It was brutal, brutal, brutal training practices. And we wouldn't finish until 8 a.m. So 5, 6, 7, like 3 hour practices. And I remember one summer, with the heat and the humidity there in Northern California, during the summer, I developed these blisters on the bottom of my feet, and I got them really bad. They actually evolved. I didn't take care of them because I did not address them early on. They turned into blisters. I had these massive blisters. I still have the scars on both my feet. They were just enormous that turned into blood blisters. And that actually ended up taking me out for, most of the season. I had to treat them and take care of them. And I think that's what Jesus is saying. We want to be reconciled to our enemy as quickly as possible to avoid any drastic or inappropriate consequences. We want to stop things before they get a whole lot worse. But the bare minimum is to not murder our enemy, to not hate them, and the standard by which God is trying to take us is to love them, to love our enemies, to pray for those who mistreat us. This doesn't mean that we allow people to just simply take advantage of us, kind of like with the last commandment, those who God has put in authority. We don't allow them to mistreat us or to hurt us. But what it does mean is that we love those whom God has only fifth commandment, put an authority over us, but sixth commandment, who anger us, who maybe even mistreat us. So to practice the commandment to not murder is more than just not hating. It has to do with being reconciled to those who maybe wronged us or even those we have wronged. But here's the thing. We can't force reconciliation to happen. We can do our part to either ask for forgiveness or to extend forgiveness. But then it's in the hands of the other people to decide what they want to do with the forgiveness that's being asked for or extended. Our responsibility is simply to initiate the process of reconciliation. We who were once enemies with God, that were reconciled to Him through His death, have now been given the ministry of reconciliation. Paul says to reconcile others to Him, and a part of that is through forgiveness. By forgiving one another, by working with each other, we are not only being reconciled to one another, but reconciled to God and each other. So our responsibility then for the commandment to not murder is not to just not murder. It's not to just not hate, but it's to be reconciled um, to other people. And that may not mean full reconciliation. I understand that family pains run long, they're generational, but we do have a responsibility to quickly be reconciled, to take those steps to initiate that process as quickly as possible. So it's a challenging one, but I hope you guys are blessed with this message today.